Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Newark. I'm Donna Salek. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm your worship associate today. I've been coming to UUFN for about 3 years. I'm a greeter, a member of the Social Justice Committee, and the author of the Your Democracy Needs You program. Our call to worship is Invitation to Arrive and Rest by Shari Woodbury. Out of the din of the city,
away from the noise of the crowds,
we come to rest in this moment,
in this place,
set apart from the never-ending to-do lists.
embracing the seventh day, a day to rest.
We come to the warmth and stillness
of this sacred hour.
Remember, you have chosen to be here. Something in your life led you to arrive here now.
Whatever tasks or cares await you, now, for this brief time, simply rest.
Allow your soul to be nurtured. Let the waves in your mind and heart gradually subside.
As you come home to yourself, holy and whole.
Come, let us worship together. Our chalice lighting is Igniting This Precious Light by Vanessa Taitang. In igniting this chalice, we cast upon it our hopes and intentions for all that is positive in our minds and in our hearts. May this precious light shine on. In the light of hope, in actions of love, we gather in community to celebrate a heritage of faith, hope, and love. Let us bring this Unitarian Universalist heritage into our world and our lives today.
So I want to start my comments today by thanking Donna for bringing us this service. She, along with Tina and Janet and many others, have been working diligently to remind us about our need to engage with our democracy. And since Donna has been the face of that effort, she's also been on the receiving end of a lot of people's anxiety about this election. So it is probably no coincidence that she came to worship and suggested that perhaps today, 2 days before this historic election, we needed to have a service that brought us all together in community with compassion to help us enter into this week from a state of calm and community. Thank you, Donna. Amen to that. In conversations with Reverend Kim, she shared with us the practice of appreciative inquiry. Appreciative inquiry is designed to connect our minds and hearts to the positive aspects of our lives. We are currently so focused on the negative news, it's hard to appreciate what we have in this country. This service will hopefully get us back in touch with some of the freedoms, rights, and values that we hold dear and cherish. To provide us with some context for that, we thought it would be helpful to consider how far we have come as a country in advancing our democracy. It was not easily done, and we will continue to need to nurture it. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a trained historian, so I had to hold myself back on this one. I just want to remind you of some of the significant moments in history that we have engaged, where we have engaged in the struggle to live up to our ideals of democracy. Over the last 248 years, I was struck by that. In 2 years, we're going to have a hell of a 250th birthday. Over the last 248 years, we've made progress and faced setbacks. We've gathered together in community, organized social movements, passed legislation, and worked to improve and advance the liberties and justice that our democracy seemingly represents. There have been wins and there have been losses. One of the articles that Donna shared with me was from Time magazine by Nancy Gibbs, entitled, "How America Can Still Come Together." I was struck by the very first sentence. Gibbs writes, "A country born by breaking with a king inherits descent as a birthright." I want to repeat that. A country born by breaking with a king inherits descent as a birthright. In other words, descent is in our country's DNA. Gibbs continues, "Generation after generation faces its tests of conflict management, crafting the Constitution itself with all of its convictions and compromises, balancing local and federal power centers, a civil war exposing fissures in democracy's bedrock, and on and on. Battles over rights and responsibilities, suffrage, prohibition, isolation versus intervention, and then the serial upheavals over justice for multiple marginalized groups, Black, female, gay, trans. Each era is tasked with not only choosing its fights, but also how to fight them. When our country was founded, the only people who had the right to vote were white men who owned property. It was not until the so-called age of Jackson that other white men obtained the right to vote. It took the abolitionist movement and a bloody civil war for the Constitution to be amended with the 13th and 14th Amendments, conceptually allowing Black men the right to vote, which was in fact restricted in practice with Jim Crow legislation. Women did not have access to the vote until 1920 with the passage of the 19th Amendment, from which Black women were excluded due to those same Jim Crow laws. It took decades of civil rights activism to fully extend the right to vote to Black people, male and female, through the Civil Rights Acts of the 1960s. We have lived through periods of conflict and violence at different points in our history. But we have also lived through times when people have come together, unified, to advance the cause of justice, liberty, and democracy. Change does not happen in a vacuum. People in power do not suddenly, on a whim, open the opportunities for shared governance. It comes from struggle. And as all the social activists in the room can attest, it takes time. The abolitionist movement, the movement to end slavery, was one of the largest social movements of the antebellum period. It started as a fringe movement, and it soon became mainstream. But it took a civil war to abolish slavery, followed by the period of Reconstruction, a time of both promise and peril, with the passage of the 13th and 14th Amendments that laid the foundation for later social justice movements' efforts. It was also the period that saw the rise of hate groups that fought those advances for decades. It took women 72 years to obtain the right to vote, and today, 104 years later, we're on the verge of electing our first female president. From my lips to yours. The civil rights movement from the late 1930s into the 60s was a powerful social movement that still reverberates today as different groups have sought to expand the promises of democracy and justice. More recently, we have seen how our country unified following the 9/11 attacks, as people coalesced as a nation, moved by the bravery of the first responders, the outpouring of sympathy for the victims, and the way the country pulled together after the attacks. The history of this country can provide us with many concrete examples of social progress we have made. I would suggest that we look at that extraordinary arc of history and how we have constantly struggled to live up to our ideals of democracy, from women's suffrage, the passage of civil rights acts, and the ongoing struggle to expand access to voting for all people. In spite of the stark differences in political rhetoric that we've heard over the last several years, Among voters, the divisions are not as stark and distinct as we have been told. Americans are by and large unified on many key issues. Most Americans support some gun control measures, such as stiffer background checks, banning assault weapons, and high-capacity magazines. Minimum wage referendums have been passing by significant majorities in so-called red states. Reproductive justice and access to reproductive health care unifies a significant majority of the country, and both Democrats and Republicans agree we need to find a way to address the problems at the border, maintain the solvency of Social Security and Medicare. Gibbs' article cites the nonprofit group It Starts With Us, who found that 9 out of 10 Americans agree on the core principles: a government that is accountable to the people, respect and compassion across difference, the rule of law applied fairly to all people. When we look back at what we have been through as a country, it can be comforting to think about what we have endured and persisted through. There have been moments in our history where people have shown real grace in the face of tough times, and that can give us a perspective on this moment today. So we thought it would be helpful if folks had a conversation and we break into small groups, 3 to 5 people, and consider the following question. When have you felt proud to be an American, or a variation of that? What do you value most about this country? So we are going to break up for 5 minutes into small groups, chat with the folks you're sitting beside, contemplate these questions, and then we'll come back together and see what it is that we value. So, does anyone want to share what they value? I get to play Phil Donahue.
I'm Deb, and I went to a concert last night with the UD Chorale and the Morgan State Choir, and they actually asked these questions that we had on our screen. So I had a chance to think about it last night. I would say is freedom of religion, because my own arc of faith has been pretty broad, and I'm not sure where else I could have done that but in America.
Thank you. So we are in sync with the rest of the universe. Anyone else?
Hi, I'm Ann. I was talking with a bunch of volunteers for a particular campaign yesterday as we had time to wait for our assignments. And the common themes in the conversation were honesty, fairness, and justice.
Anyone else?
So our group, believe it or not, talked about the military a lot. And you'd think, I'm old enough to be the peace, love, dove, hippie thing, so, and I have friends in the military, but even though it's screwed up in many ways, and there's problems with it and all of that, that the bottom line is that they're there. They're there to protect us in times of trouble. And I guess the election thing about that is that's so important for the commander-in-chief.
Anyone else? On the other side of the room.
I would say diversity and involvement. The fact that there's so much citizen involvement, and we get to, make phone calls, knock on doors, and write postcards and text, and do all these things and express our opinion in a lot of ways.
It's our Constitution. It's a living document. It has been with us from the very beginning, and it will remain with us. And it's what has kept us together and allowed us to change and grow.
So we talked about using the word proud or having pride to be an American. And I've always had a little bit of an issue with that word. I think for me, it's more about gratitude, because there's really nothing that you've accomplished by being an American. By being born here, we should feel a sense of gratitude that we have what we have and recognize that and appreciate it.
I think a nice thing to remember is that no matter what happens in the world, we always have a safe place here to be with friends.
Amen. Anyone else here in the room?
I'm just being sort of what you call a naturalized citizen. I am amazed at the amount of choice that you have and the ability for you to speak, to say anything you want. Okay, and that really is, in a way, a double-edged sword. I mean, like this too much choice is not really freeing, the way I feel. But at the same time, the ability to also speak your mind, and it's a great thing. And it's really, I always think of the U.S. as a young nation. We are kind of like just trying to grapple with all these issues. Other countries are like they have a long history, and they've kind of settled in their ways, but here we are still like adolescents, finding our way. So which is, good, but maybe sometime we'll mature into something, I don't know what that'll look like.
That would explain our adolescent hissy fits. Anyone else in the room? All right, let me see if there's anything in the chat on Zoom. You can mute this sucker. Marion, do you have any feedback?
Yes, we did some of it pretty similar. Several of us, it took leaving America to go to another country to have us realize what we had here. Someone expressed the plane landing from overseas and everybody in the plane breaking out in a cheer at the joy of being back in the United States. So it's almost, you don't know how good you have it until you step away from it and come back. And being very proud of our country.
Thank you. And thank you all. I would hope that you would consider this practice of remembering the positive, and as Joanne said, and I wrote it right here, possibly incorporating a practice of gratitude, especially over the next few days. I personally am grateful that we live in a country where we do have the right to vote, and I look forward to doing so after this service.
You did?
Our close.
So, Election Day is 2 days away. If only we knew what was going to happen. This is our moment, our turn for painful uncertainty. We follow in the footsteps of the farmers of 250 years ago, who had only their muskets and the clothes on their backs as they marched off with the Continental Army in pursuit of freedom. They had no idea what would happen next. Ours is a pioneering spirit. We share it with astronaut Alan Shepard, who in 1961 sat strapped into his Freedom 7 spacecraft atop a Redstone rocket and could only hope he knew what was going to happen next. Together, we hope for progress, like the transgender woman who is running to represent Delaware in the U.S. House of Representatives. What will happen next? We don't know what comes next for the idea we call America, but we do have some notion of what can come next for the reality of America, because ultimately the reality of America is shaped by every one of us, by our actions and by our love.